Hello. I've come down here today to my friend Charles, who was in the Second World War, and I'm going to ask him to try and try and remember sort of things that he experienced during the war, and we're going to have this as a visual record of one man's experiences in that conflict. Hello, Charles. Right, let's get straight down to business then. What can you remember, first of all, about sort of being called up or whatever?
Well, it's a lot of years ago, of course, but some of the things really are very clear in my mind. Because a lot of my friends had joined the regular Air Force during the year before the war commenced, 1938. And there was 3 of us left who were chums. And the weeks before the declaration of war, everybody in the country really knew a war was going to take place. So a week before, we endeavoured to join the Navy on the Monday before, had a day off from work. But the Naval Recruitment Office was closed in Hartlepool. So we went over to Middlesbrough to join the Air Force on the Tuesday, and it was open, but we were told they weren't taking any recruits. But a war was imminent. Wednesday we went to work. Thursday we decided, having a small beer in one of the locals, that we'd better join the army. And true enough, on the Friday morning we all went down to see if we could join, and we were enlisted without much ado and kept in the local barracks and didn't get home or out till the Saturday afternoon, when we were kitted out in dreadful kit, in actual fact, and we were moved to a gun site which was run by territorials on the Tees mouth on the Sunday morning. And I vividly remember that war was declared in the speech from the Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain at the time, on the radio, and so we were at war. Everything changed rapidly. But in the few days that followed, being sort of enlisted into a territorial unit and being 3 strangers to the chummy crowd, there was another unit needed additional manning, which was a regular unit at a place called Donnybristle in Scotland. And so us new 3 recruits were posted forthwith. And we were met by a very, very friendly bombardier called Bombardier Cherry, who looked after us rather well. But they were getting geared up to go to France, even in that early stage. And having had a week on the around Donnybristle on the 3rd and 4th, we were quickly trained down to Blackdown Camp near Aldershot. We were kitted out with new uniforms again and new equipment, everything new, trucks, guns, everything. And after what seemed a relatively small time, on the 5th of November, we sailed from Southampton on the Lady of Man, which had been a boat that used to carry passengers to the Isle of Man from Liverpool. And we landed in Lee Harve. And we went by cattle truck. There was about 30 in a cattle truck with straw during the course of the afternoon, in different shunting places, Abbeville, God knows where, in northern France, till we ended up in a place called Sanguin, between Harris and Lille. And we stayed there during the winter. It wasn't a great activity. We did a little bit of training, practicing, but basically we enjoyed ourselves, billeted with the French people. And my friend and I, at the time, were actually billeted with a local undertaker. But the family looked after us very well. Next door was a laundry, a French laundry, and the owners of that laundry really looked after us rather well. And they had about half a dozen very charming daughters who used to take us out to the estaminets, where we used to have egg and chips, Evs and frites, and we soon learnt a little bit of the lingo and had a fairly merry time. Then came Christmas, and the weather was bad. There was lots of snow in that year. And we were moved up to the Maginot Line to relieve the French troops who were out home for Christmas. And that was a concrete jungle, if ever there was. It was a fearful place. And we were down in the bowels of the earth in these concrete dormitories for living conditions. And it was very, very cold. It wasn't very attractive at all. We were glad to see the end of it.
Did you feel safe in there, in the Maginot Line?
It's strange to say, did we feel safe? Because somehow nobody expected anything very much to happen. And feverishly, there was another line being built down towards the coast along the Belgian frontier. And everything seemed fairly quiet. There was little activity, there was one or two guns popped off on the Maginot Line, perhaps one a day, and somebody fired a shell, There was hardly anything happening.
And you couldn't see anything of the...
Yes, you could see the Seafield Line.
What was happening on that? Nothing?
Nothing. It was just concrete emplacements, and it was a little bit eerie at night because they kept powerful searchlights on both lines searching round. But it was like, I would think, the nearest thing of feeling you're on a foreign planet. It was very, very funny and odd. We were only there about 2 weeks. We came out and back to Sangin again, and we were there in the spring, and we had one or two little different things happen. An odd German bomber was shot down. We saw some German prisoners of war, flyers, that were captured. And we, in our turn, sort of practiced but enjoyed life very well.
Could I ask you what did the French people that you were billeted with, what did they think about the war? Did they have any views on it at that stage?
Well, the view, I think, was that they seemed fairly contented and seemed to think that nothing drastic would happen like the previous war, the World War I. They seemed to go about their ordinary business. There was plenty of food, I remember. There was plenty of sort of wine and drinking in the establishments. There was nothing really as drastic from a war point of view as there was in England after we had returned. The blackout didn't seem to be as severe either. I noticed that. We noticed when we came back to England the blackout was severe. You didn't show a bit of light anywhere, whereas in the villages there, there was no great thing going on.
Did you get leave back to England?
No, I never got leave at home. I never came home from November till Dunkirk. I never got home. We were a little bit of leave in France, where we used to go to a rest camp near Arras and sort of just visit the town and one thing and another. And hear all the vivid stories of things, the way the French lived in different ways. And there was one incident. I then reached the rank of having 2 tapes, actually. I was a bombardier. And we were in a canteen where there was a lot of the first batch of Canadians. This was in 1940, early 40. And there was a big punch-up between Canadians and the French. And we hid for cover behind the bar tables, but the place was surrounded by red caps. We were all running and arrested, and as a consequence I was demoted and lost my tapes. So that was number 1, but it happened later, having regained further tapes. But it was rather fun, it was enjoyable. But then, on one afternoon, I always remember, we were suddenly all rounded up and alerted and said, the Germans have invaded Holland and the Low Countries. And it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I remember, and we loaded everything on the trucks. And I was a member of a small Daimler scout car. And I suddenly got my tapes back, you know, bang, bang, bang. The CEO said, yes, you're all right now. So I was in charge of this scout car. And basically we're carrying messages between the different batteries, because it was an artillery battery. And the driver of the scout car was a little curly-haired guy from Liverpool, but I was a Geordie ago. But we got on fairly well. And off we went in the afternoon in convoy, across the border into Belgium.
Yeah.
And we were greeted by the Belgians very, very well. And we streamed up to the north side of Brussels and went further on than Brussels during the night. And during the night I had to take the car, the scout car, through Brussels, although it was declared an open city and was lit up all night. And we shouldn't really have been going through, but I had to get this urgent message through to divisional headquarters, which was located about 5 miles south of Brussels. And the way round was complicated, so we made a decision to go through. Incidentally, we got lost in Brussels, and we were hailed from a window, and we stopped and got out, and we went to see these people, and we had a glass of wine with them, and we suspected that they were probably trying to get information to use against ourselves.
They might have been fifth column, you think?
Probably were. I wouldn't have said they really were, because they were well established in this house in any event. But we kept fairly quiet, and off we went, and we found the quarters and came back again. And we came back through Brussels again, and we were nabbed by the police, because army vehicles shouldn't have been in. And after a delay at the police station of some hours, we were eventually sent packing and got away with it and got back to our unit. When we got back to our unit, we were based in an old chateau that had been taken over. All these things in wartime move very fast. I suppose a week before it was occupied by the people who owned it. And the scene when we arrived was to see a British plane being attacked by 2 Messerschmitts. The plane was a Lysander, and it was flying very low, dodging through the trees and things like that. And the Messerschmitts were diving and diving on it to see if they could shoot it down. In actual fact, one failed, and it failed to recover from its dive and crashed into the land and burst into flames. And the other one peeled off and went away, and the Lysander went on its merry way somewhere, God knows where. But we weren't there very long.
What did you think of that, just as an incident? Did that have any effect on you at that age? Did you?
Well, I was 20 years old. It was thrilling and exciting, and I wouldn't say that I was afraid of it. It was we just watched it as spectators, really. But it was fairly exciting to see.
This was actually over the chateau.
Yes, that's
nearby,
right. Yes, yeah, oh yes. You know, the Lysander was flying, as low as 50 feet almost and things like that. And it was very exciting. The first combat that we've seen in aerial combat from the ground. But then lots of things happened, and we were moving from pillar to post, from one map reference to another. And I used to have to go in ahead, really, to these particular map references. And then when the convoys came and the artillery came in, I said, this is the place. But, the next day we're off somewhere else, and so we're always on the move, constantly on the move.
Can you remember which division you were in, or which part of the army?
Yes, we were attached to the 51st Highland Division. And it was made up of Scotch infantry regiment, supported by, I think, Guards armour vehicles, probably. I don't know whether they'd established them correctly, but there was certainly the Horse Guards motorised armour, not tanks as such, and also our artillery, 25-pounders and 3.7 anti-aircraft guns, 40mm Bofors, Lewis guns and Bren guns. and small arms, of course, and we were chasing about all the time. And we're constantly moving across the border between Belgium and France and back again. And in the end, we ended up at Poppering. And Poppering was a beautiful town, small town, that had been damaged badly in World War II and had been rebuilt, of course, during the years, late 30s and early 30s. And we were just outside, probably a mile away, and on the afternoon that we arrived on the morning, it was dive bombed, the town, by Stuka dive bombers, you know, and I'm talking about 100 or probably more dive bombers. And they absolutely blasted it to hell, and they came back 2 or 3 times. You know, it wasn't just one raid. There was about 3 raids in the afternoon, and there was a lot of French civilians killed and considerable damage. It was pretty ghastly when we went in the early evening. By then, of course, it was May. And we were then told to dig in. We expected the Germans to attack us with their infantry and tanks, and we had no real doubts that this was going to happen, because the build-up of information before the war commenced was that the German had a powerful army, and when it started we seemed to be ill-equipped, the BEF, and we felt a little bit ill-equipped.
Did you?
Yeah, we did. And
because I thought you said that you had all new...
Well, we had new equipment like that. But here we were at Poppering, and the next day the German Air Force flew over, except for the incidents in Brussels with the Lysander. I hadn't seen an RAF fighter, but we did see one later that day. We saw 2 actually, a couple of Spitfires, one of which landed and the pilot was badly wounded, and it landed, really belly landed, the undercarriage was messed up, and he was badly wounded, and the other Spitfire landed. God knows how. He got the sergeant pilot in the cockpit some struggling way, and they took off. Whether they were successful in getting home or not, God knows.
You mean they both got into
Yeah, they both got in, and it staggered into the air and nearly crashed, one thing, but it got airborne with the canopy open and half of them leaning out, and it must have flown to some nearby aerodrome. But he rescued his chum. I always remember he was a sergeant pilot, but both sergeant pilots. And our CO was demonstrating with them not to do this, but they ignored him, you know, said bump sort of thing, why are you doing this? And of course the wounded guy, he was in a pathetic state really, but he was shot up quite badly. I always remember that. And then the Germans came over and they dropped leaflets, one of which I kept for many years, saying, please surrender, you're surrounded and you'll be treated in a honourable way and looked after and God knows what. So we all laughed at that. But then we gathered together in the late evening and told in actual fact we were surrounded and we were going to blow up all the guns by putting a shell up the breech and one down the spout and breach the guns, in other words, and keep as much of the small arms and loose guns, and even tried to take away 40mm Bofors and equipment like that and break out that night, which we did. And then we dug in just outside Poppering, having broken out during the night. And I remember laying behind an edge in the sunshine. The weather was lovely, perfect, and I was absolutely exhausted, I suppose. But it was beautiful laying and sleeping in the sunshine where we were resting. Then the alarm came, and we had these foxholes, they called them later on in the war, but they were just little bits of earth dug in the ground, and we dived into them, and that was the first time we saw the German infantry and German tanks approaching across the field.
How far away were they, would you say?
Well, they actually approached us, of course. the infantry, I suppose, got within 100, 150, 200 yards. Some of the tanks seemed to go through us and back again, you know. It was really like that. And yet all that time, although these tanks seemed dreadful things and were a bit horrifying, I never really felt scared in actual fact. And they seemed to move away, they passed by us, you know. We had a little exciting battle which lasted, I presume, less than an hour. And then they seemed to disappear and move off. They didn't want to be messing about with a smallish group of unit, I suppose, in what might have turned out to be a major engagement.
And were you just lying there? When
we were just lying there.
Firing away?
Oh, yes.
You was having a go? Yeah.
We were having a go, and I can't say that I ever fired it in anger by aiming at anybody precisely, although I did have a real good go on the Lewis gun which we had. I really raked the ground on that, I remember. But whether that hit anybody or not, I wouldn't claim to have done so, and I doubt if I did. So I could almost really say I never fired a shot in anger. I just fired a shot in panic, you know.
Well, when you said you had a go on the Lewis gun, does that mean that you took turns to have a go on it, or you just happened to be there? You know?
Well, while all this action was going on, of course, we weren't without some casualties. Some people were getting injured and wounded, and some were getting killed.
Yeah.
And of our unit that went overseas, you know, I forget, but about 20% came back. The other 80% were either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner of war. And so that was our first blooding of action. So there was a big, tough sort of guy who'd carried this Lewis gun, and he'd got shrapnel, I think, rather, from a shell rather than a bullet, in his stomach, and, you know, he was in a pretty hopeless state, and somebody carted him away. So the Lewis gun was there, and I could use it, and I used it.
I see.
And I stuck fairly close with my pal, really, the Liverpudlian guy. We were pretty well always together. Then we moved from there, really, down the roads, which were now being flooded with civilians trying to escape from the Germans. A lot of the dikes had been burst, and the land was getting flooded. And we got to a point where everybody was almost exhausted when the CO, he was a good bloke actually, they called him Harry Lister. He said, well, we've got to get to Dunkirk, but I'm asking for volunteers to use all our small arms on a rearguard action. And there was one or two of us, not many, about 50 I suppose, and about 3 or 4 officers, and we had quite a good, NCOs were pretty good. The sergeant major, we called Frosty, was really a tough in the battle situation. The quartermaster sergeant was really a tough, you know, and they're really smashing blokes. And don't forget, there were just a few of us that were part-time soldiers, sort of.
Yeah.
The others were regulars, and they were really good, and they looked after us a good deal. But I was young. I can't say I was afraid at all. But we did come to a scene where there was a massive barn, and it was full of wounded and dying people, and a few RAMC people attending to them. And that was rather shattering to see, you know. 300 or 400 of these people in a dreadful state, many of them dying, things like that. And the RAMC staying behind caring for them. And also seeing a French cavalry regiment on horses going up to the front against these, and we'd experienced some of these tanks in front of me, and, you know, they were just going, you know, on these white chargers sort of things. It was absolute crazy, but, you know, that was the situation. They'd come from some situation further in France and decided that's what they were going to do.
Did you see many other French soldiers around at the time?
Yes, I saw many French soldiers, and the majority of French soldiers were running away and going home. They didn't want anything to do with it. They wanted to get back to their families. They felt the Germans were unstoppable, and we had one French liaison officer with us, and he was constantly worried to death about his family. And before we got to Dunkirk, he just disappeared and presumed he'd done like the rest of them. They all seemed to be on the way home. They'd dropped all their equipment and stuff like that, and they were just panning out, heading for further down south in France like the rest of the civilians were. And I never really came across any really in action. The only people we were with really was the British and a few Canadians that were out there at the time. There was nobody from the other Commonwealth countries. Oh, there was a few Indians, yes. There was probably an Indian regiment had been pushed in well along the months ahead. And then we started this planned rearguard action, and we were actually put in command by the Welsh Guards. The Welsh Guards had come home from England, within a week.
Yeah.
And they were doing the rearguard action, the Brigade of Guards, and we were sort of attached to the Welsh Guards, who were magnificent, really. And they absolutely knew what they were doing, you see. Hold a piece of ground for, an hour, and then the next piece of ground you fall back to, 200-300 yards, a quarter of a mile perhaps, and then you held that ground in a place and so forth, until we came to a canal. And when we came, now this rearguard action was probably taking place over a period of 3 or 4 days, 5 days probably. And we came to this canal, yet we seemed to always be able to get food, we always seemed to get something to drink. There was always some French people who were staying put at home, who seemed to would give you food and give you eggs and
so you weren't getting any rations, army rations then? They don't.
No, probably every other day. And we were more concerned on grabbing ammunition. Somebody would tell us, there's a load of ammunition left over there, and we'd go and get loaded up with ammunition. It was scary at times, and it's a bit scary when you get a big German tank blazing away with its main armament, probably 50 yards away from you, but firing above you, and then grinding. That used to haunt me in my sleep afterwards, this grinding noise of the tracks of these tanks. But they got at times extremely close, but we were pretty nimble. I was very fit. I was extremely fit, actually.
Yeah.
And we got back. And when we got to this canal, the Welsh Guards decided to defend it just with the Welsh Guards. Everybody else had to get back to Dunkirk. So off we went to Dunkirk. We carried just our rifles and some ammunition, water bottle, odd things like that. And then we got to Dunkirk. And at Dunkirk I'd lost my Liverpool pal, although I met up with him in England afterwards.
What happened to him? How come you...
Well, in the medley of all the scrapping and things like that, you lose people. And I'd mucked up then with a chap in the Royal Ulster Rifles. And eventually, when everybody was trying to stream into Dunkirk itself, we eventually got onto a boat, and its name was it was one of these boats that had been commissioned by the Ministry of Transport. It was an old tramp, probably about 30-year-old, with an old smokestack up. But it belonged to one of the Ropner's fleet. Ropner's fleet had about 100 old tramps, and they were all called after pools. And this one was called Stagpool. I think it was Stagpool. Anyhow, we were all clambering on this, but it got hit once or twice, and it got a list on, and we decided to get off, and we got off it.
Was this in the harbour itself?
Yes, all along the mole.
What, the
Yes.
East Mole?
The East Mole. So we got off that, and we decided to go up the beaches, and we went out of Dunkirk, went up the beach, up the sand dunes, for quite a long way. And we're on the beaches for God knows how many days and nights, really. But you could see the Navy out at sea, you could see all the boats, and everybody felt confident that we would be lifted off.
Why did you go out to the sand dunes? Were you told to go out there, or did you just go
No,
out there?
because it was so crowded round the docks and the moles, and the Stuka dive bombers were concentrating on that. So, you know, there was a 50-50 chance you'd get blasted to hell, so we thought we'd have a better chance going up on the sands and getting a boat out there ourselves. However, the boats were packed with people. You know, the pinnaces coming from the destroyers and the boats laying off there, different sort of boats, cobbles and God knows what, and they were packed out, and some of them were just 50 yards from the shore and capsizing, people going to drink and all that. We got on one, and it capsized, and we had to get back again. But the water was very shallow there, so that was a fortunate thing. You could wade out a long way up to
Like
your
you
waist.
ditched all your small arms at this
Yeah,
stage?
yeah. But that night, it was a beautiful night, you know. The weather was really great. And then, of course, there was many stories one could tell about the incidents on the sand dunes and the beaches, and the continual dive bombing, and the heroism of certain people who stood there with machine guns and fired at them and one thing another, and helped people who were wounded, and looked after people who were dying and things like that. It was remarkable how it, you know, just felt as though you belonged to one family. There was nobody was whining, there was nobody getting into hysterics, you know. They knew things were happening, and they were just hoping they'd get away, and there was nobody.
You didn't see anybody who'd actually cracked up then? Just wondering.
Oh, you did see
Yeah.
people who were a bit broke down and were crying their eyes out and things like that. But these were few and far between, candidly, and they were often taken care of by people who knew them or one thing or another, you know. But this guy from the Irish Rifles and I, we decided we'd do it our own way. And that night we found there was a raft from one of the destroyers floating about. So we got this raft, we got on the raft, and with some wood as paddles we decided to, you know, nothing was impossible. 20 miles it is, they said, to Dover. So we started on our way. And we got into the water when it was fairly deep. And it wasn't very great deal of fun. We weren't making much progress except going up and down in the waves, and the troughs get deeper. And suddenly there was something dark on the skyline as we rose and fell. And this Irish guy said, "It's a German submarine." God. We couldn't really make sure whether it was, but he said, "No, I'm sure it's a German submarine. Let's lay low. Don't make a noise." And we didn't make a noise. But then a searchlight came out and came sweeping round. We could hear the engine of the vessel. The searchlight suddenly settled on us. They stayed on us. They said, "Oh, we bloody had it. We've gone through all this and now been caught with a bloody German submarine. You know, what a bloody thing." So, okay. And we said, well, they put the hands up and shout, "Comrade," so we better do the same. You don't want us to be shot to bits by them, at least, you know. So we heard the noise of a sort of pinnace or something going towards us. "Comrade, comrade," and a cockney voice said, "All right, chum." And it was the PO, petty officer of the pinnace, who picked us up with his little crewmen from the HMS Worcester. And we were shipped onto the HMS Worcester, and she was actually on a patrol. She wasn't picking up people, really. And we were patrolled with there for 3 days, right up the coast and along the Dutch coast, and then came back to Dover and disembarked.
You must have been under aerial attack quite a lot were you then?
At sea?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't know much because we were kept down below in the crew's quarters. We were never on deck. We, were out of the way, kept out of the way, really. There was only 2 of us. And, they looked after us. They were very kind to us, the sailors, giving you food, the cook come in special. They thought we were heroes, we thought they were heroes, really, but which they were. And we had a good time with them, really. And when we landed at Dover, our uniforms had been in a dreadful state, and the sailors had given us some of their kit, you see. And we came down the gangplank to the RTO, Rail Transport Operations, Royal Engineers, to report where to go in Navy sort of gear. But there was a photograph taken from one of the national papers, and it appeared on the front front page of the newspaper, and another picture which I kept for a number of years, but thought it was rubbish after a while. And then we eventually was able to establish that we weren't sailors to the army, we were soldiers. And we went to a camp near Yeovil in Somerset by train. And everywhere we stopped, people were rushing on the station and giving you things, tea, cups of teas and God knows what. And there was a great deal of excitement. And when we got to this camp at Yeovil, we were put on parade by the camp commander, Colonel somebody, who called us all yellow bellies and we shouldn't have left France and God knows what, and cursed us pretty merrily, and then packed us all home on leave. And we went home on leave, having been kitted out with uniforms again. And I suppose we were home about a week, fortnight nearly probably. And then telegram came calling us to assemble again with the regiment, and we went to Aberystwyth in Wales, and we used the university dormitories and that for kipping down, and the canteen and that for food. We had a few weeks there, 2 or 3 weeks, and then we had new equipment, and we picked it up, and we were posted to Plymouth.
Right, a couple of questions about people in school have asked me, to ask. First of all, in the period 1939 to 40, that sort of early part of the war, they've asked me whether what the food was like. It's surprising that they asked me that. When you were over there in France in the early part, asking about food.
Well, the food in the army food, really,
Yeah.
we used to have biscuits sort of mushed up with milk, like a rice pudding. We used to have tins of soup, McConaughey they called it, famous soup, for army use only, and corned beef, and that was the state, and bread and marge, bags of tea, always lots of tea, and anything we could scrounge off the French farms.
And what about, one of the girls asked me to ask you about the French food. Do you ever go at that, or were you only interested in getting English food done by them, as it were, when you went
No,
to their camp?
the French food was very, very good. The French shops, the bakers, were fantastically, really. The French butchers were very clean, and the establishments, which were like pubs, cafes type of thing, which we used, were very, very good. But our favourite meal was eggs and chips and things
That's
like
right,
that.
yeah. Did you have wine with that?
Yes, we had wine. Yes, we were introduced
Did
to
the egg
wine.
and chips go with wine?
Yes, it did.
Mm.
Because we drank more wine than, you couldn't get a good beer really. So, it was the thing to have a bottle of wine. It was cheap, it was rough, but we thought we were doing something different and we seemed to enjoy it. But the food itself, the French food, was very, very good and there was lots of it.
Another question about the early part. Can you remember the sort of equipment that you had to carry around with you
Yes.
when you were on the march?
Mm.
What did you have to carry around with you?
Well, you had a pack which was, I suppose, about as big as a hiker's pack now. Not these big packs they carry. Well, probably about half the size of that. Probably it could hold probably 40 or 50 pounds of stuff in you. What you carried in your pack really was a change of shirts, socks, underwear, some of your personal belongings, writing material to write home. In addition to that, probably some Mills bombs or something like that, undetonated, and different things like that, maps. And then you had a small haversack, which you carried on one side, I think was the right side, which used to carry shaving gear. Oh, you carried one blanket as well in your pack. Also a ground sheet, waterproof sheet, which you used as a cape as well. The side pack used to be mainly carrying that you might have to use in a fighting situation. A water bottle, a bayonet, about that long bayonets, that's not the short ones, the long bayonets. A Lee Enfield 303 rifle, of the more modern type for 1940, but old-fashioned now.
Yes.
Um,
How much ammo did you have to carry around with you?
about 50 rounds. Not very much.
And what
They're
about...
in clips of 5.
I see. Did you have to carry spades and things like that, or was that all?
No, you didn't, and it depends what your job was in the, if you were a Lewis gun, you might have to carry the Lewis gun, and Oppo would carry so many pans of ammunition because they're in circular pans. If it was the Bren, you carried a Bren, and your body carried the ammunition. Basically, you carried what you had to do.
Did you feel weighed down with it all on? Or did you notice? Because I know you said you were fit.
Yeah, you did. But you did more marching with your equipment in training than you did in real battle. Because everybody realised that you always used to be chucked. I mean, you had your army number on everything. It used to be chucked in a truck, and you were just travelling light, really, because you might have to walk or march miles or run several hundred yards, and it was no good carrying all this bloody gear. It was in the truck left behind. And I mean, who had time to change his shirt or underpants really when you were dealing with situations like that?
And moving on, really, it's about equipment in a way, but moving off the subject
You had
slightly.
a steel helmet as well.
And your helmet, yeah. What about marching on were all the roads cobbled? Were every road cobbled?
No, there was a lot of the roads in France were sort of tarmacked in the centre and earth at the side. They weren't all cobbled. There was a good deal of cobbled ones, but quite truthful, we didn't do all that much marching. You used to march in single file at the side of the road. So there's always traffic coming round. You didn't march 3 abreast like you did in England and all that. You just marched at your own step.
Yeah. Did you come across the Foreign Legion at all when you were over?
Oh, the Foreign Legion I didn't come across in France. But strangely enough, I came across the Foreign Legion in India. They must have belonged to one of the units that had been serving in Southeast Asia before the war. And I came across the Foreign Legion in India, and there were from, the Germans among them, Italians among them, and actually they were a good crowd, had high regard for them. They seem to be a decent crowd.
A lot of questions about Dunkirk again, but people have been asking me about being on the sand. Did you wade out into the sea a lot?
Yes.
In lines? Did
Well, you
actually
see,
do that?
you see photographs of people
Yes.
wading out to the
Did you
boats.
actually do that?
Yeah, I should think I did it 2 or 3 times a day. I mean, we were probably down on the beach for a week, and every day you were trying to get away. So you tried to get one of the boats. When you saw one of the boats came in, everybody initially, you know, at first were rushing down to the boats. But then there were officers down on the beach called beach masters, who'd come over especially from England. Some of them were Navy, some of them were Army, and they, you know, give an instruction, an order, in other words, that people would line up, you know, 1 or 2 abreast, you know, get it organised better. And people obeyed those orders by and large. You know, want the panic. And you see these films about Dunkirk and all that, there always seems a lot of bloody panic and people in the water. And of course, there was all these tragedies of people getting drowned and boats overturning and all the, you know, the scenes like that, which people were scared stiff. But by and large, everybody was calm.
Somebody asked me, was it smelly? Was it just...
It was beautiful, smelly of sea breezes on the sand dunes. The weather was beautiful. If you went to Southport beaches, you know, that side of the Mersey, and where the sand dunes are, it wasn't unlike that. It isn't unlike that. And yeah, it was quite I can't remember it ever raining during that week. And the night time, the skies were clear. No, it didn't smell. I mean, there was smell of burning things, where things were burning and different units burning equipment and things like that. But and there was smell from the oil tanks burning as well initially. But by and large, no, it just smelled of a beautiful seaside.
And you never felt at any stage that you wouldn't make it out back to England?
Well, English people are remarkable, really. They don't push very hard when things are going easy, but when the chips are down, they seem to be able to, you know, they're very optimistic race, really. And I don't think there was anybody on the beach didn't think they were going to get off. And you just had to say, oh, the Royal Navy's there, you know. Everybody say, oh, they'll get us off, you know. Might take a day or 2, but they'll get us off. You know, that was the feel of the situation.
Did you notice somebody else asked, because we were doing the role of the Air Force in the early time, somebody said, did you notice the RAF around at all?
Well, as I mentioned before, I first come across the RAF in these 2 instances before I got to Dunkirk, and we hadn't seen many RAF about during the scrapping that was taking place in Belgium and that. But when we got on the beaches, there was hordes of squadrons that appeared of the German bombers and Stuka dive bombers, Messerschmitts and things like that. But every now and again you'd see about 3 Spitfires or Hurricanes, you know, and you didn't see many of them, but when you did see them, they were getting stuck in, you know, they would just dive in onto probably a couple of squadrons of Messerschmitts. They weren't sort of flying off and that, they were getting cracked.
So the sky during the day was always full of aircraft?
Oh yes, yeah, it was, yeah, from dawn till dusk. Yeah.
A lot of anti-aircraft going on as well, I presume.
Not so much because
no ammo.
There wasn't ammo and they hadn't been able to get the guns down there. A few, the main anti-aircraft action was from the destroyers with pom-pom guns and the Navy guns.
Yeah, yeah. The usual questions, a lot of them wanted to know whether you saw any terrible, horrible sights. You know, whether that had any effect on you, or whether it had no effect on you.
Well, there were some horrible sights, and when you're in a sort of fighting situation, I mean, like on the rearguard, well, people were getting wounded, but I mean, there was everything going on. It was like being in a boxing ring and saying, was it a bloody awful sight seeing a bloke with a bloody nose or something like that, you know. There was a scrap going on. If it was somebody close to you, whom you knew, you just had to go and help the guy, you know. And usually they were stunned and shocked if they were wounded at all, even slightly. Most people get wounded shocked, mainly.
Were you ever actually wounded at all?
Well, I had a little thing on my little finger, and it was just a sort of skin wound, you know. They were lucky, really.
Yes, yeah.
But most people were shocked, and so they were white and shaking. And what do? You just try to calm them and say, oh, this isn't much, it's just a bloody scratch, it might be a bit more. And, you know, use your field dressing to patch it up and try to find out where the first aid, be the REMC were, you know, and put the people in a safe cover, and then get on with the job. You couldn't do much more. If you'd done that and felt, you know, that was all right. I mean, if everybody were taking wounded back, I mean, there'd be nobody at the front fighting, really, you know.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And the worst shocking scene, as I mentioned before, was coming to this barn and seeing it full with, you know, 200 or 300 wounded, very, very badly wounded, and very, very few REMC doctors and police looking after them. It was a dreadful sight. And that stank. Yeah, that did stink, yeah.
And they were presumably being left.
Oh, they'd left, and the doctors and all that were staying behind, because we were retreating then, and they knew they were staying with the wounded, and that would be what they would do in any event, you know.
Yeah, yeah. One other question, which is really not about, it's more about the political thing, really, but what did people think about Winston Churchill taking over? Because he took over, didn't he?
I think
10th of May, didn't
yeah,
he? 10th of May it was.
I think by and large everybody was very, very pleased, because nobody really had great confidence in Neville Chamberlain, really. You know, once peace in our time was 12 months before, and here we were having a war and we were ill-equipped.
And did, when you were on this sort of retreat backwards, did the soldiers, you know, did you feel that they had made a complete shambles of it, that England had made a real shambles of the whole thing, or was it, didn't you have time to think about that?
No, I don't think we did, really. I mean, initially, before there was the retreat, we were all, you know, ready to have a go at the Jerry, really. We weren't sort of pessimistic about it. We were rather shocked with the French, you know, setting off and retreating rather rapidly, because it was very, very noticeable. And you couldn't avoid to notice the French on the run, really. But you see, the English soldier felt that he was better than anybody in the world. You know, we could take on anybody. You send them and we'll take you on. And the more you got into these tight situations and difficulties and conflicts, the tougher they got. There is the saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And this is a saying that's well known now. Wasn't well known then, but really that was the situation. When it got tough, you know, people were doing fantastic things, really, and you were doing them. You were doing things that you'd never normally do, and getting things going, you know. And no, you weren't scared. You were always optimistic. There were occasions, obviously, on the beach when you're wondering when you would get off, rather than would you get off. And, you know, you came back feeling heroes in a way. Although you'd been on the retreat and a beaten army, you felt good. But I think the noticeable thing was the regular soldiers and the officers were really brilliant people, you know. And when we came back, I mean, I remember regular officers, bombardiers whom I'd gone out with. I mean, they were given commissions and, you know, and probably rose to ranks of colonels during the course of the war, because they were really real professionals. They were really good, you know.
Yeah.
And people were promoted just like that overnight, regular soldiers, from being corporals and sergeants to sergeant majors and warrant officers like that.
Well, I think that's a good